So, if you got a Bible, keep it open. We are in Psalm 63. And I know every once in a while I show up here without glasses, and I've had a lot of people ask me, they said, wow, did you get rid of your glasses? So here's what happened. Yesterday, I was paddleboarding with my son Silas, and I was like, I'm paddleboarding, I have a decent balance, I'm not gonna fall off, so I have my glasses on. And halfway out in the lake, actually Island Lake Recreation Area, by the way, is where we're going, not Island State Park. That doesn't exist. I looked it up. But Island State Recreation Area, it's just up north by Brighton. Don't want to lead you guys astray. Island State Park, somewhere in a different country. But I was paddleboarding across, and my son Silas was like, hey, we should jump in. This would be awesome. And I'm like, you know what? Let's do it. So I just jumped, dove in the water, came up, thought nothing of it, and then 30 minutes later was like, I had my glasses on when I did that. And so they are at the bottom of Island Lake Recreation Area, and so please come and help me swim around the very middle of that lake. In a couple of weeks, we can look for them. Great, incredible, that's awesome. Well, you should bring some goggles. We'll go look for them. It'll be great. Okay, so anyway, I am missing my glasses. I have my contacts in, so I can see you, but they are straight up a year expired. So they hurt my eyes really bad. So if I'm blinking a lot today, that's why. It's because my eyes have really old contacts in them. Okay, here's the question I want to begin asking is this. Have you ever had a moment in your life where you saw something in your life and you just said, I need that. Like I have to have it. You encountered something and every part of you just said, I want that. My grandpa is obsessed with cars. My dad is too, and so I've had it in my blood from a really young age. And I remember the very first time that I saw a Ferrari F40. Okay, anybody know what this is? Yeah, twin turbo V8, old school, no any kind of electronic gizmos or anything. If you push the throttle down too far, you're gonna go off the road, okay? I was real young. I was at a massive car show in Auburn, Indiana, which there's not much going on in Indiana, but there's this, okay? And there it was, gleaming in the sun, a Ferrari F40, rakes down the side, massive squared off wing, Ferrari red, right? If you know it, you know it. A fever dream from 1989, handmade in Modena, Italy, which is the year I was born, also Taylor Swift. And it did something to me. It did something to me in this moment that I just saw this car. And honestly, as I talk about it right now, it's doing something to me again. This is an incredible machine. Have you ever had a moment where you encountered something that sort of took over your whole world? I was watching Sandlot over the 4th of July. It's one of the traditions that we have. And it's one of the most iconic, greatest movie scenes, right? Is when Squint, he's staring through these thick rimmed glasses, looking at the local lifeguard, Wendy Peppercorn. Can you picture it? You know what I'm talking about, right? This is one of the most iconic scenes in cinema history. This little kid, 11 or 12 years old, this is what he says. He's standing in the water, looking at this bombshell lifeguard of the local pool. This is what he says. I have been coming here every summer of my adult life. And every summer, there she is, oiling and lotioning and oiling and smiling. It's I can't take it anymore, right? So he leaves his friends in the shallow end of the pool. He gets up, and they're like, where are you going? And he goes over to the diving board, and he does not know how to swim, and he just steps off, right? Steps off, and then everyone's like, you don't know how to swim, right? So lifeguard jumps off, saves him, pulls him up, and he pretends to be passed out. Remember this? He pretends to be passed out, and so she starts giving him mouth-to-mouth, this little kid, and he's there, and then eventually he starts smiling, and he grabs her, and he kisses her, right? And then this is the narration of the movie says, he had kissed a woman. He kissed her long and good, right? So that's what happened. It is an amazing moment, right? And this little boy sees this woman, and he's like, I need that. I am willing to lose access to the pool for the rest of my life. I need a kiss from that person. And it was amazing, actually, as we watched this, as this scene ended and the movie moves on, literally I'm sitting there with Silas. It's a bunch of our families, a bunch of kids watching this, and Silas is literally just can we rewind that? And I'm like, why? He's like, we should watch it again. I was like, oh no, it's beginning. He's 5 years old, and he's like, I don't know what that was, but we need to watch that scene again. Have you ever had a moment where you saw something and you just thought, okay, that's what I need? It could be a girl. Maybe for you, it was literally I know my Wendy Peppercorn, right? It's that was the local lifeguard. Maybe it is a boy. Maybe that you saw in literally a line somewhere this week. And it's right in your head, you're like, I know who that is. Maybe it was a very specific taco that you saw on the Taco Chronicles. And you think someday I will travel to Chihuahua, Mexico, and I will hold that taco in my hands, and I will eat this taco, and then I will be happy, right? Maybe that's what you think. There's a moment that people can have where you lay your eyes on something, and it feels, I think, in this moment where you feel like even though I didn't know it until this moment, I've just found the thing I've always been kind of looking for. And the deeper the part of us that connects with that thing, the more life-altering this moment is. If you find this taco that you go, my stomach was made for this, maybe it requires like a road trip, or maybe even if you can afford it, a plane ride. If it's the girl you think your heart was made for, maybe it will require you to buy a ring, or maybe like sell your PS5 and become a real man. Or maybe, listen, maybe, kind of serious, but kind of joking. Anyway, it's a little dig. Take it for what it is. Take it for what it is. What happens, though, when your soul finds what it was made for? Right? What happens when, like, the most central part of you, your soul, finds what it was made for? Psalm 63 is telling us about what that is like. What is the experience when our soul finds what it has always been looking for? And here's how Psalm 63 starts. It starts saying, "Oh God, you are my God, earnestly I seek you." And so it starts with this idea of God. And it's interesting, the Bible begins with God. It's in the beginning, God. And Psalm 63 just starts with this idea, like, there is a God. But what's interesting is it isn't just a God who exists, but that this God has allowed himself to be sought after and found. And what is most jarring and really what is most incredible about this psalm is that this God has actually allowed himself in some mysterious way to become ours. And so this is how we're going to break down the text. David is saying, God is my desire, he's my delight, and he's my defense. So here's the first point, God, my desire. Look with me at verse 1. We'll just kind of read the whole thing here. He says, God, you are my God. He says, earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you as in a dry land where there is no water. God is David's greatest desire. King David, he writes this psalm. He's saying, my soul thirsts for you. And so here's a question. What does it feel like to have a thirsty soul? Now, soul is kind of an interesting word. If you're around the church a lot, we use the word soul. It's actually in a lot of different parts of the Bible. But it's not a word we use that often now. And so a lot of us, when we think of our soul, you might think of like, this is the spiritual part of me, right? Like I'm physical, but I also got a spiritual part of me. Or you might think like there's some deep thing in us, this soul, that it sticks around even after our body dies, right? Our body goes away, but our soul sticks around. But the word here translated soul is actually the Hebrew word nephesh. And nephesh is a very interesting word. It's actually literally translated other places as like throat. So it's like here, like some of you are laughing because you're like, yeah, it's a weird word, right? It's translated as throat. And Hebrew is a really interesting language. It's actually kind of complex and poetic in the way it communicates meaning. And so it's like, it's your throat, but also everything that kind of gives your body life and vitality, it comes through your throat, right? You eat and you drink and you like become a living person, you stay alive. And so the idea of nephesh in Hebrew is like your very life. It's like your whole self, the totality of who you are. And so when David is writing this psalm and saying, my soul thirsts for God, he isn't speaking about like a certain spiritual part of him that was never satisfied until he met God. He's not talking about like a certain part of him. He's saying, my whole being, all that I am, is thirsty for God. And I think one of the mistakes that King David, as he writes this psalm, he's trying to speak against is this idea that God can satisfy some parts of you, but there's other parts he can't, right? We have like spiritual needs, and God can satisfy those, but we also have physical needs. And there's a spiritual part of us and a physical part of us. And it's true that we're not just like a bundle of cells, right? You don't just replicate according to your DNA, and that's who you are. It's true that you're physical and spiritual, but things are not just separated in the way we normally tend to think they are. God is not the one that our spiritual selves are made for. David is saying, no, God is who my soul was made for. My whole being, all that I am, is thirsty. My flesh is fainting for you, God. And no matter where I go in this world, I can find nothing that can satisfy my essence, my true self, but you. In the 1730s, there was something that happened really in Great Britain and in parts of Europe, and it extended into America, called the Great Awakening. Who's just aware of this? All right. So much of our country today is shaped by what happened. There was this like profound movement of God that swept through all of America at the time. And one of the defining leaders of this kind of movement was a man named George Whitefield. Who's heard of George Whitefield? Anyone like read his biography? Anyone? You should, okay? You should. An incredible man of God. This is his preaching was so anointed and powerful that he would do, like there was no church that could contain the crowds, okay? And so he would preach open air. This is before, there's like microphones and PA systems. He would open air preach to crowds of up to 80,000 people. Like Benjamin Franklin went to some of his rallies because it was one of the biggest things that was happening in the American colonies during the day. And he just would say he could project. He was like this physical anomaly that could preach and project without any kind of, amplification to crowds of 80,000 people, and everyone could hear him. Like that's ludicrous, but Benjamin Franklin doesn't lie, right? So that's true. But George Whitefield, and he wasn't a Christian. He wasn't like, this is amazing. George Whitefield was like that, or Benjamin Franklin was like, I'm an atheist. I'm just saying this is incredible what God is doing here. George Whitefield, he said there was a little book that changed his life that was given to him by Charles Wesley, one of the other figures of the Great Awakening, that changed his life. And the book was called this. It was called The Life of God in the Soul of Man. It was written in 1677 by a man named Henry Scougal. Henry Scougal wrote this book when he was 27 years old. He died when he was 28. And the short life of this man, like the power and the passion that he had for God, literally has been making waves for hundreds of years after. So you, as you're sitting in the room and what do you love as a 25-year-old? Well, what you choose to love might actually either change the world or it might not. But Henry Scougal, he loved God, and he wrote this little book, The Life of God in the Soul of Man. And here's the central idea. Here's the central line of the book. It says this: the worth and excellence of a soul is to be measured by the object of its love. So in other words, if you're trying to figure out, like, is this a great soul? Is this a great person? Is this someone of weight and character? Like, what's the substance of this human being? He says the thing you have to look at is, what do they most love? And if what they most love is truly great, then this is a great soul. And so he just says the worth and excellency of a soul is to be measured by the object of its love. And what bled out of men like Whitefield, what spread around the world like wildfire, was a love and it was a passion for God above all things. David Hume, anyone heard of David Hume? Yeah, you guys have heard of David Hume. He's a famous atheist, right, kind of philosopher. And he was found at one of these kind of sermons by Whitefield. He's sitting there listening, and someone comes up to him, and they're like, hey, what's going on here? They're surprised by this. Like, I thought you don't believe in the gospel. And it's famously, he says, no, I don't, but he does. And that's why I'm here. Because this person genuinely loves God. There is something undeniably compelling about somebody when they really desire God above everything else. Maybe you've met people like this. Maybe there's been times in your life where you'd say, this is true of me. But this is what I want to be true of the people in our city when they see people of Treeline Church. Is that they would look at us and they would be able to say, I don't know if I believe in this, but they do. They really do. Have you ever had a moment with God where he stopped being an idea that you believed was true and he simply became what you wanted more than anything else in life? It's a very different thing, isn't it? To be able to kind of answer a quiz correctly, do you believe there's a God? Yes, check. Do you believe he's a creator? Check. Do you believe he's all-powerful? Check. That's a different thing than to wake up in the morning and say, more than anything in life, I want him. When Jesus spoke about the kingdom of heaven, it's interesting. This is how he always talked about it, always. He says the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which someone finds, and then they cover it up, and then in their joy, they go back home and they sell everything they have so they can buy the field. He's like, what happens when someone enters the kingdom of heaven is like there's this affection and passion and joy and love that just wells up in them so much so that they're like, take everything else, I need this. I need this. I found the treasure I've been looking for my whole life. Here's the question. What do you love? What do you most love? Here's a different question. I was thinking about this. This is kind of a little interesting. What if you were given what you most desired last week? I ask this every once in a while because I think about this sometimes. What if just you were given exactly what you most desired last week? You're just given it in full. Now here's the other question. Would that actually satisfy your soul? Like that, for me, I'm telling you what, that'd be a bummer. Like if last week, the thing I most desired, God was like, here, have it. I'd be like, no, right? Like that wasn't what I really wanted. It wasn't what I really desired, but last week, it might have been what I loved the most. The first part of the psalm, David is saying, God is my greatest desire. And he's speaking this out because he wants it to stay that way. It's both like a proclamation of saying, this is what's really truest deep down inside of me, but also I'm speaking this over my life because I want to remind myself of what's most truly worthy of my desire. But here's the second part. He says, God is also my greatest delight. He's what I want the most. But David's also saying, he's what I enjoy the most. One of the really interesting things about desire is that often the most enjoyable part of getting something new is actually in the buildup of getting it, right? Have you ever had this experience? This is true of most things we buy. My experience is this. Maybe you can relate. There's like all this joy in researching it. You're thinking about it, and you're eventually going to try to find a way to get it. And there's like, it's exciting, right? I mean, there's a weird dopamine hit when you see something on Amazon, and you're like, buy. Like you just click it, and you're like, this is amazing. Like it does something to you when you think you're getting something that you want, but then you have it, right? Then you have the thing, and it's yours. And sometimes it's really amazing for like an hour, right? That first hour, you're like, this is great. I sacrificed, I bought this thing. And sometimes things are really great, and you're like, for a week, you're like, this is really awesome. I'm going to tell my friends about this. They should buy this too. This is incredible. Sometimes it's a month, right? But I think most of us have this experience where often the desire of the thing is more enjoyable than actually having the thing itself. You ever felt that? It's actually a very common kind of psychological phenomenon. And so it's like the desire itself is more enjoyable than the thing we have. And the reason is because our desires can play tricks on us. You see, oftentimes we enjoy the idea of something more than the thing itself is because in our imagination, the thing we're getting can give us way more than it actually can in real life. Sometimes we see the thing, we think that it's what we've been looking for, and we go, this is what I've been looking for. Like this thing, if I can have it, it'll make me happy. But then once you actually have the thing, you realize that you were actually looking for something else. And this is true of relationships. This is true of marriage, right? Like you get married and you're like, this will satisfy me. And then you're like, they're also sinful. What happened, right? And like, this is true of like vehicles, houses, like new countertops, like whatever it is that you're into, you get it. And then you're like, I got to keep looking, right? Psalm 63 teaches us that actually the opposite is true of God. The closer that we get to him, the more that he really becomes ours, the more we realize that he really is the thing we've always been looking for. This is interesting. God's capacity to satisfy is greater than your capacity to desire always. And he's the one thing in the universe this is true of. Unlike everything else in the universe, he is more satisfying than you are thirsty. And everything else in your life, you are actually way more thirsty than that thing is satisfying. This is what he says in verse 2. So he has this desire in him. And so he says, so I've looked upon you in the sanctuary. So David's desire for God, this like hunger, this thirst, it drives him to the sanctuary. He takes his eyes off the world, off whatever might be distracting him. And he's in the wilderness, but it says that he gets alone with God to the sanctuary or this sacred place. What does he experience here? Well, there's two words. It's power and glory. And we can kind of dive into these a little bit, right? But like God is the creator, and this makes sense. He's the one who speaks things into existence, right? At the beginning of the story, God says, let there be light, and there just is light. Like he's the God of power, but he's also the God who is other than. He's set apart. There's a weight to him. He bends and pulls on everything else in the universe because he is the one with glory. And we could do a deep dive on these and say, this is what David sees when he looks in the sanctuary, but there's something else he sees that he focuses more on. Look at what he finds when he looks. This is verse 2-4. He says, so I have looked upon you in the sanctuary, beholding your power and glory. Like I'm in awe of these things. I'm looking at them. But then look at verse 3. He says, because your steadfast love is better than life, my lips will praise you. He says, so I will bless you as long as I live. In your name, I will lift up my hands. You see, the one who sits on the throne, he is the one who has all power and glory, but he's also the one with steadfast love. And this is what grabs the soul of the king. How can we delight in God in the way that David does? Well, we actually need to experience the same thing he experienced. And what David experienced when he comes to God and he worships him is that God actually delights in him. Here is the line that I think is the key to understanding this whole psalm, and it's in the very beginning, okay? This is like the first half of verse 1. Just go in your Bible, look at it there. I want you to look at it. If you don't have a Bible, it's on the screens. This is how it starts. He just says, oh God, you are my God. Something has happened in David where God is no longer just something to believe in or agree with intellectually, but in a mysterious way, David is saying here, God is his. Like, this isn't just David saying, like, God, I choose you. Like, I think you're the best God. Like, there's a bunch of other options. You're the one that's going to get my sacrifices and my allegiance and worship. He's saying something way deeper and more profound than that. No, he's saying something that it seems like somebody should not say. He's making a claim over the one who sits on the throne of the universe, the one who has all the power and the glory. He's making a claim that, in a sense, he belongs to him. It's almost a claim of ownership. How can you behold the one who has all the power and all the glory and then say they are yours? And the answer is because in the Bible, the story that we are given, the one who sits on the throne, who has all the power and all of the glory, he is the one who has steadfast love. And this is what David is just amazed by. You see, when Jesus is trying to get us to understand the heart of God, right? He doesn't just tell all these stories about his power and his glory and his might. He always tells stories about his love. He tells the story of the prodigal son. Remember, this is one of the most famous stories in the Bible. Most people will be familiar with it to some degree, but it's a story of there's two sons, and there's one who just kind of is discontent with life with his father, and he runs away, and he ends up basically ruining his life. He dishonors his father and gets to this place where he's so hungry and thirsty, and there's nothing that can satisfy him because he's squandered everything that he had, and he thinks, I'm just going to go home. I'm going to try to work my way back into the family, maybe become like a servant. And there's this scene that Jesus paints for us of what it is like when people turn around and try to come home to God. And it's an incredible scene. He's walking on the road, and he's actually rehearsing these lines, like, I'll say this, and maybe God my dad might forgive me. But he gets closer to the house. He sees that there's someone running towards him. His father actually is running out on the road to meet him before he even gets home. The one who's dishonored the family, dishonored the name of his dad, squandered everything he'd been given. He just ruined his inheritance. And the picture that we're given is that the father, this whole time, every morning had been standing at the edge of his property, looking and longing and waiting for the day where in the distance he might see just a glimmer of his son, so that he could actually run to him and wrap his arms around him and put his cloak on him, new sandals on his feet, a ring on his finger, and say, welcome home. My son who was dead is alive. My son who was lost has been found. You see, just because you have not been looking for God, it does not mean that he has not been looking for you. And this is the picture that we have. He's saying, God, your love, your steadfast love is better than life itself. You see, what he delights in more than anything is the fact that actually God delights in him. I guess this crazy thing. It's not just like, God, you're powerful, you're amazing, you're majestic, and because of that, I praise you with my lips. I give you my whole life. Like, that's not the thing that has his heart. What has his heart is when he looks at God, he sees that God somehow actually delights in him. He loves him despite how he wanders from him constantly. His love is steadfast. And so he says that part of you, that steadfast love is better than life. It's just better than life itself. He says, so I will bless you as long as I live. In your name, I will lift up my hands. God is his desire. God is his delight. But look at this last part. God is also his defense. This is what he says in verse 5. He says, my soul will be satisfied as with fat and rich food. My mouth will praise you with joyful lips. And when I remember you upon my bed and I meditate on you in the watches of the night, for you have been my help. And in the shadow of your wings, I sing for joy. My soul clings to you. Your right hand upholds me. The psalm starts saying this, God, earnestly I seek you. And it's interesting, in the Hebrew, it could also be translated early. He's just saying, like, the very first thing I intentionally do with my life when I wake up is I seek you. And now as he lays his head down in the middle of the night, God is the very last thing he's thinking about. And he says, my soul is satisfied when I remember everything you have done for me. Why? Look at verse 7. He says, for you have been my help, and in the shadow of your wings I sing for joy. You see, God is David's hiding place. God is his refuge. He's his defense. He is the one he runs to for help. But what he experiences as he runs to God for his refuge is that God is the one who has always been wrapping his protection around him. You see, David is able to say, God, you are mine, because he has experienced God saying over his whole life, David, you are mine. Have you ever had a moment with God where you've experienced him speaking that over you? Because God will never be able to be yours until you realize that you have always been his. I mean, how can we know this like David did? How can we know this is true, right? How can we actually look at God and believe that we really are his? Well, all that we need to do is look at the one who now runs out to meet us. When you try to enter the holy place, the sanctuary, the sacred place, there is actually someone who now runs out and meets us before we can even get there. And he is the one who has scars on his hands and feet. He's the one who hasn't just spoken our name, but who's actually, it's been engraved on his body. Henry Scougal, he says this, he says, when all the other gifts could not prevail, God at last made a gift of himself to testify to his affections and in hopes that he might engage the world. He says, the God of love had shot all of his arrows, but he could never pierce the heart of man till at last he put himself in the bow. This section in verse 4, it says, in your name I lift my hands. I just want you to picture that for a minute, like you standing and worshiping God in his name, lifting your hands. Do you know that when Jesus lifts his hands to his Father in a strange and mysterious way, he's also lifting up our names? Like, I was thinking about this. It's like our names are written on his hands. And when he worships God, there's a sense in which he's worshiping God. He's also lifting up our names to his Father and saying, would you love them in the same way you love me? And it's because my name is written on him. David is saying, I've chosen to write his name over my entire life. And in his name, I lift up my hands. You see, from the very moment we were kicked out of the garden, out of the presence of God, we have so desperately been trying to build something with our hands, to grab hold of something with our hands so that we might make a name for ourselves. And in this moment, David's saying, no, I don't need to do that because I already have a name. It's the name of God that's actually been placed over my forehead. That's the name that sits over my whole life. I am his, and I don't have to build something or grab hold of something. I can actually just open up my hands and lift them up to my Maker. And in his name, I can praise him. He's the one who's actually grabbed hold of me. I'm singing from beneath the shadow of his wings. In 2008, something happened in my life. It's changed the whole trajectory of my story. The arrow of Jesus Christ pierced my soul. Has it pierced yours? Jesus stopped being an idea that I believed was true, but he became what I was thirsty for with my whole soul. And because I wanted him more than anything else in life, I just said, here, Jesus, take everything. I give you my whole life. I give you my lips, my future. I lay my life down on the altar because you'd laid your life down on the altar for me. And there are times in my life where I still dig my heels in. I try to stay my ground. I try to hold on to some sin or find something else to love. But God has called me as his own. And this is the truth that keeps calling me home each and every day. I am his and he is mine. There is nothing in my life that pulls on me like this. Is that your story? Like, is that your story too? And when I allow it to take me, whenever I let go of what I'm trying to hold on to and I simply lift up my hands to Jesus, I actually find in that moment more joy than anywhere else I can find in life. And I was thinking about this, and I was just thinking, what would it be like if the city of Ann Arbor, when they looked in at the people in this room, that's what they saw? They just saw people who were like overwhelmed in passion and joy for God. And they go, I don't know exactly what's going on over there, and I don't really believe in their God, but I can tell you what they do. They do with their whole heart. And if I could hand them the entire world on a platter, and the only thing I had to take from them was Jesus, they would all say in unison, take the world, give me Jesus. He's the one thing I want. He's what I'm thirsty for. I don't know if I believe this, but they do. I want to pray for us that this would become more and more true of our church. Jesus, you are the one that our souls are thirsty for. Jesus, whether we know it or not, whether we can identify it or not, our whole being is restless until we find our rest in you. You are our home. You are our refuge. You are our desire, our delight, our defense. God, would you once again grab hold of our hearts if we have wandered from you? And God, if we are that son, that daughter who is lost, has never come home, would today be a day where you just in a mysterious way, you speak over our lives that we are yours? Would you come find us in the dark, Jesus, so you can lead us home? In your name, amen.